Coming up on Network Africa. Sudan's military rejects Ramadan ceasefire despite UN Security Council's adopted resolution. Presidential candidates in Senegal begin election campaigns ahead of March 24. Plus, leaders of Libya's two rival governments agree to form a single unified government. Hello and welcome to the program this week. I'm Layo Olaride. We'll begin with Sudan, where representatives of the military say there would be no ceasefire during this Ramadan period, except certain conditions are met. Amid the escalating tensions, General Yasser Al-Attah, representing the country's military, says there will be no truce, except the RSF withdraws from civilian and public spaces. Analysts say this declaration underscores the entrenched conflict between Sudan's armed forces and the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, RSF, revealing the complexity of the nation's political landscape. The military's condition was predictated on a commitment forged during mediated talks in Jeddah last year, May. The conflict between the army and the RSF erupted in mid-April 2023, sparked by disagreements over the trajectory of Sudan's transition to civilian rule. And since then, the fighting has exacted a heavy toll on the country. Meanwhile, the UN Security Council had adopted a resolution calling for an immediate cessation of hostilities in Sudan during the Muslim holy month of Ramadan. The resolution was adopted with 13 votes in favor and 2 abstentions, and that's from China and the Russian Federation. Well, speaking after the vote, British Ambassador James Kariuki and US Ambassador Robert Wood urged the warring parties to find a sustainable resolution to the conflict and also ensure removal of obstructions to the provision of critical humanitarian assistance.
We urge the Sudanese Armed Forces and Rapid Support Forces to act on this united international call for peace and to silence the guns. We further urge the warring parties to build trust and seek a sustainable resolution to the conflict through dialogue.
It is important this Council has spoken with one voice to condemn the violence, demand a ceasefire, and call on the parties to ensure removal of obstructions to the provision of critical humanitarian assistance. We acknowledge this week's announcement that the Sudanese government has agreed to one cross-border access route by land from northern Chad and access by air, but this is insufficient. Addressing the dire humanitarian needs of all Sudanese requires unhindered cross-line and cross-border access from multiple points of entry to the most devastated areas of Sudan.
The VOA's correspondent, Mohammed Yusuf, joins us now for more on this story. Hello, Mohammed, and thank you for your time. Let's begin with what is the update on the war, even as the Muslim month of Ramadan begins?
Yes, there was a lot of hope that when Ramadan begins, probably for some Muslims, Monday, or for some even tomorrow, there was a lot of hope that there will be rival groups, the Sudanese Armed Forces and the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces. There was a lot of hope with that. That's why last week on Friday there was that resolution, and it was passed, and that was something that was supposed to be given feedback by the both sides. But the central government, of course, which is now the Sudan Armed Forces, have rejected that, and of course they have set some conditions, and that means by them rejecting a ceasefire, it means that the war is going to continue even after as the month of Ramadan begins.
Like you've mentioned, the military has rejected a ceasefire during this period, asking for the RSF to withdraw. But have we heard any comment from Dagalo's camp?
The RSF is yet to respond to that comment made by the Sudan's armed forces, but the comment, of course, will be statements. But as we speak, there are many parts of the country that the war is going on, and they will respond, of course. And the Hameti, the leader of RSF, has been on a diplomatic term in many countries in Africa, and there's some assumptions or expectations that his group is going to be more diplomatic. But that being said, situation doesn't change, and no one is willing to accept any negotiations of any call for ceasefire, and that means more deaths, more suffering, of course, for the Sudanese civilians.
Indeed, and it's a terrible one for the civilians. How are the people faring, even, as the fasting period begins?
That the humanitarian situation is very dire. Even before the war, Sudan as a country, its population has been suffering. There are millions of people displaced, and as we all know that as war goes on, of course we know in the Indian Ocean, at the Red Sea, there's a lot of activities there, and a conflict particularly coming from the Houthis in Yemen, and that we know that some humanitarian organizations like IRC, the International Rescue Committee, is going to the route that is going to use to provide that humanitarian assistance, and that means a longer time, and that means more problems for people. If it was taking 2 weeks, that's going to take a month. And as month of Ramadan begins and humanitarians cannot reach those people, it's going to be more problem, more suffering for people. As we also know that in the part of the sea, now there's a lot of chaos and a lot of problems on that side, which is also complicating for the problems. Of course, we know that humanitarian aid has not been reaching quickly. And Moran conflict going to bring problem for people, and it's going to complicate for them as they.
Well, Mohammed, we know there have been mediation efforts, in the past, but both leaders, have not been able to have a face-to-face discussion yet. What's the progress on, seeking dialogue between these two warring factions?
Yes, since the war began, there have been, of course, dialogue that's been going on, particularly in Saudi Arabia, Jeddah, and there have been no direct talks between the main protagonists of this conflict and the Hemeti himself. The representatives have also been involved in the talks. But now, as we know that the statement that were coming out from the Sudan's armed forces giving conditions for ceasefire, they want all of the men to leave certain strategic places, particularly civilian areas.
Apologies, we do have to cut short this interview. We're having audio troubles with you, Mohammed, but thank you so much. Thank you for your reporting. The VOA's correspondent there for Sudan. Moving on to political stories now, Chad's Prime Minister has announced he'll run for the presidency ahead of elections scheduled for May. His announcement is coming a week after the leader of the junta, interim President Mahamat Derby, announced his own candidacy. Mr. Suse Masra is a former opposition leader and was appointed Prime Minister by the junta. He signed a reconciliation deal with Mr. Derby after he returned from exile before he was appointed in January. Now, he was speaking to his supporters at a rally on Sunday, saying that he is seeking the top seat so as to unite the people and heal hearts. Mr. Derby's main rival, opposition leader Yaya Dello, was killed in a shootout with security forces in February. That's after the government blamed him for deadly attacks on the country's security agency, a claim which he denied. He was widely predicted to be the main opponent of Mr. Derby in the election. And in Côte d'Ivoire, former President Laurent Gbagbo has agreed to fly his party's flag as the presidential candidate in the 2025 elections. Now, this was announced at a meeting of the party's Central Committee by Kitinan Kone, and that's the spokesperson of the African People's Party, a party Mr. Gbagbo founded in 2021. The 78-year-old was acquitted in 2019 by the International Criminal Court on charges relating to his role in a civil war sparked by his refusal to concede defeat in the 2010 election. He lost control of the party he previously founded, and that's the Ivorian Popular Front, IPF, while he was imprisoned, awaiting trial in the Netherlands for several years. But he is believed to still retain a large and loyal base of supporters at home. The West African country's next election is expected to be held in October 2025. President Alassane Ouattara, who was re-elected in 2020, is yet to say if he will run again. Meanwhile, in Senegal, presidential candidates have kicked off their election campaigns following weeks of violent protests across the country after the vote was delayed by President Macky Sall. The 19 approved candidates vying for the top job now have a shorter period to rally supporters ahead of the March 24 election. Now, this election is expected to be the most tightly contested race since Senegal gained independence more than 6 decades ago. The former mayor of Dakar, Khalifa Sall, who is running for the 4th time, organized a marching caravan through the streets of the capital to begin his campaign. The frontrunners are predicted to be former Prime Minister Amadou Ba as the ruling party's choice, and imprisoned Bassirou Diomaye Faye, who stepped in for opposition leader Ousmane Sonko, who's in prison and has been barred from running. The only female candidate is Anta Ngom, the head of Sedima, one of the country's biggest food companies. President Macky Sall is prevented from running again because of term limits in the constitution. Away from political stories, the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, Filippo Grandi, and the Secretary General's Special Advisor on Solutions to Internal Displacement, Robert Piper, have both visited Mozambique, calling for a renewed international commitment to finding solutions for the displaced people. Mozambique has been plagued in recent years by humanitarian crisis linked to violence from non-state armed groups and the adverse effects of climate emergency. Well, it currently hosts around 700,000 internally displaced people, as well as hundreds of thousands of returnees who require assistance. On the joint visit to the country, the UN principals reaffirmed their commitment to work with the government and other partners to strengthen solutions for the displaced in Mozambique.
While we still have 700,000 IDPs around the north and parts of central Mozambique, 600,000 displaced persons have actually gone home in the last 1 to 2 years. That's a big deal. That's a vote for peace. That's a sense of confidence that we are turning a corner in Mozambique. And so, whilst we're here to learn how to better support displaced people in their displacement today, we're also here to learn how to accompany these hundreds of thousands of people who are heading home, who need to be supported. Solutions are all about rebuilding a life, not just physically, but all of the social and economic parts that make up a good life. So a lot of learning here, a lot of humility to understand the size of the challenge, to understand the government's vision. And the government has a vision in Mozambique, transferring land to displaced people, of allowing people to go home or to be integrated into towns if they choose not to go home, and to giving them support in that process. But they need a lot more help from the international community.
welcome back to the program. The Botswana Wildlife Producers Association has expressed discontent against the UK's hunting trophies import prohibition bill. The bill tabled in the UK's Parliament in 2022 seeks to prohibit the import of hunting trophies into the UK. While speaking at a media briefing in Gaborone, the Minister of Environment and Tourism says the proposed bill will have a negative impact on communities dependent on income of management of hunting in Africa. Our South Africa correspondent, Innocent Samosa, reports from Botswana.
The tourism sector is a significant contributor to Botswana's economy, accounting for a substantial portion of the country's GDP. However, the sector is facing some challenges. The Botswana Wildlife Producers Association alleges that former President Ian Khama is at the center of the United Kingdom's hunting trophies import prohibition bill. Government says the motive behind Khama's involvement remains unclear.
So I can't come out here and call out the motive of a former president. Why? But I told you. Remember I said he is involved in the tourism industry. He has a vested interest in the tourism industry, which is not consumptive. You understand? So I called upon you to go and find out from him, because now you know I've given you facts. Find out, seek an interview with him. Find out from him why.
The trophy hunting industry brings in approximately it has been estimated between 20 and 30 million US dollars per annum. And that is very significant revenue that if we lose it, or if the country loses it, and if communities lose that revenue, they will then be foregoing their opportunities to benefit from this wildlife.
I had the privilege to meet with the representatives from the Hunters Association of Botswana to hear their perspective on wildlife conservation and tourism.
Climate change it's a major one. Most of the animals move as a result of looking for grazing and looking for water. Currently, we are in a drought here, so we certainly, most of the watering points, which normally dry up in June, July, are currently dry, so it's a big challenge.
The government of Botswana is calling on the United Kingdom to consult communities on the ground who directly benefit from trophy hunting. Currently, Namibia, Botswana, South Africa, Zimbabwe and Zambia highly benefit from trophy hunting. Attempt to get comment from former President Ian Khama was indeed unsuccessful. From Maung, Botswana, Innocent Samosa, Channels Television News.
Leaders of Libya's two rival governments have agreed to form a single unified government, signaling progress in ending a political stalemate that has persisted for more than a decade in the country. In a joint statement on Sunday, the leaders said they had agreed on the necessity of forming a new unified government that would supervise long-delayed elections and unify sovereign positions. The talks were held in Egypt's capital, Cairo, and were led by the Arab League Secretary General Ahmed Abdul Gaiti. The negotiation involved the president of the Libyan Presidential Council and the head of the High State Council, both based in Tripoli, as well as the Speaker of the House of Representatives in the rival Benghazi armed administration. Well, Libya began to fracture after the fall of long-serving ruler Muammar Gaddafi in 2011. The International Monetary Fund says it is assessing the impact of a deep drought on Zambia after the African country declared a national emergency. Julie Kozak, the IMF Director of Communications, says the drought will also have some fiscal implications because there will be a need to ensure the population is supported. In February, Zambia declared the drought a national disaster, with President Hakainde Hichilema saying the lack of rain had devastated the agricultural sector, affecting more than 1 million families.
And on the corporate governance law, the the approval of what we would consider a landmark corporate governance law is a very important step towards strengthening state-owned enterprises in Ukraine. The law enhances the role of supervisory boards and brings Ukrainian legislation closer to the standards of OECD countries, while respecting critical principles of public financial management to also contain fiscal risks. Robust implementation of the law will be critical to improving SOE performance and forms the basis for further reforms in this area, such as developing an SOE state ownership policy. The drought will also have some fiscal implications because there will be a need, of course, to ensure that the vulnerable population of the country is supported through the shock, and that may increase financing needs. So that's the preliminary assessment. We do anticipate that will have a short-term adverse impact on the economy, but we do not, at this point, the team does not expect that the drought will have a persistent effect over the medium term, and for that reason, we expect that the impact on debt sustainability will be limited.
Investing in gender equality and women's empowerment is not only more urgent than ever, but also an incredibly smart investment to generate economic growth, food security, income opportunities, and better lives, particularly in rural areas where most of the world's poorest live. Now, this is the message from the International Fund for Agricultural Development on women's empowerment. One of the key challenges in achieving gender equality by 2030 is an alarming lack of financing, with a staggering $360 billion annual deficit in spending on gender equality measures. In Malawi, the UN's International Fund for Agric has been investing in rural women to help them address this gender inequality.
One key thematic area that the trade program is promoting is the issue of gender and social inclusion. Okay, gender and social inclusion. So we are trying to empower women and men, boys and girls, to be equally participating in the interventions, so that together they are able to realize the importance of, joint decision making at the household level.
Boats operating along the Lagos State waterways will soon be powered by compressed natural gas. The Lagos State government is partnering the private sector to help provide hybrid dual fuel systems for marine propulsion engines as a fueling option to power boats.
Good morning.
Lagos residents living on the island and Ikorodu have taken advantage of this alternative means of transportation, which is touted as one of the fastest means of commuting, especially in riverine communities.
Yeah, it's more convenient, faster and cheaper.
It's fast. I'm coming from Ikorodu to Falomo. That's why I use water to come.
With about 2 million residents already plying the waterways, the state government is making plans to increase the number of boats to decrease waiting times at the state-operated terminals.
We're commissioning additional 12 ferries that will be handing over. I don't think this is good with that ferry that will hand it over, or with private operators that will hand it over. The ferries have been completed. They are doing water testing right now, and each one of them between 35 to 40 passengers on our waterways.
That's not all. The state government is also considering the use of compressed natural gas to operate passenger boats and ferries to reduce the dependence on petrol of diesel-operated boats. This initiative, according to the authorities in charge, will also reduce water pollution and make water transportation business more profitable.
As you know, for the longest time, it's always been about petrol-based boats, petrol-driven boats. But with this now as well, the gas and also discussions around electric. You know, as Lagos always likes to be in the forefront of innovation, that is why we are also getting involved with this conversation, and to be able to ensure that we also have CNG and electric ferries running on Lagos waterways.
It's being done in partnership with the Blue Gas Marina, a US-based company involved in hybrid fuel systems for marine propulsion engines.
The cost of operation for the operators and the ferry operators of both operators will go down tremendously. Their bottom line will improve. Commuters will utilize the waterways more, because once the price comes down, they will utilize the waterways. Then there will be less pollution. There will be less pollution, and it will be in line with government's effort at carbon pollution reduction.
The state government believes adoption of CNG as alternative energy source in all areas of the transport sector will help cut costs, reduce pollution, and also help Lagos State achieve zero emission by 2050. Well, this is in Tunisia, where dozens of people wearing national costumes are celebrating National Day of Traditional Dress in Tunis. Well, footage shows the event participants wearing an authentic attire from the Tunisian culture, as well as matching with banners and flags, including the Chinese and Indonesian flags, through the streets of the country's capital. Participants were calling on UNESCO to designate an international day for traditional costume. According to local media reports, the Al-Mala as a dress for rural women, the kaftan, which are wedding clothes, the red trabali and the Hawali jab are some of the outfits chosen by this Sunday's event participants to represent the culture of the country. Beautiful and colorful. That's it on the program today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Layo Olarinde.